This video is partially sponsored by SleepShift, a long-time partner of the channel. They've decided to remove pre-orders and long waits between purchase and delivery. In fact, with the Elite Series 1 and the brand new Elite Series 2, all products are ready to ship. And with the code EL5, you'll get 5% off while also supporting the channel. And now, back to the video. Welcome back to the channel and a new how to play video. Today we have Enrico once again with us. Hi Enrico.
Hello.
Today we are going to talk about blue-purple Sanji, a deck you have just released a full guide on. As always, you can use the code HIL10 to get a discount and support the channel. So if after watching this video you still have questions, you can find everything in the guide. Unfortunately, I don't personally know the deck well enough to answer detailed questions. And that's why I often don't reply certain comments. Not because I don't want to, because I will just end up repeating over and over, go check the guide. So, Enrico, like I asked you for Luffy ST 29, I think it's only fair to ask you the same thing about Sanji. Why did you decide to pick up this deck, and where would you place it in the current meta?
Okay, so of course a really nice question to start with. I decided to pick up Sanji mainly because this deck I tried to play for such a long time. So I was like, finally I have a time window where actually this deck can be top tier and I can play it. So it's purely based on like, first of all, the fact that I like the deck a lot because it gives you a lot of room to use your skill basically. And also, and this is something that I cover as well in the guide, is I think that the deck places itself very well into the tier list currently. Sadly, it's going to be a very short meta because we're going to have now this time window from end of February to start of April, where we're going to have access to the EB03 supports that, of course, are crucial to the Sanji to function. Then we're gonna have the rotation that is gonna hit very hardly Sanji because he's gonna lose the red rock. So if you ask me today, do you think this deck is gonna be good in OP15? The answer is I have no idea. So I think right now the deck places itself in the top tier. Also, we saw some results in Japan, even though they had a very short time window as we have as well. I think the deck has a really strong base, and I think he can come back at any time in the meta. And actually, it's very dangerous for Bandai to have such a deck because the thing is that, from spirits in the meantime. No, I think the deck has a lot of potential because the supports that he has are very generic, and it can be very easy for Bandai to print some crazy card that can break the deck at any time. Now that you have access to the 5-cost Reiju from EB03, I think in the future, if they decide to print any 7-cost event, either blue or purple, that can be very generic, like a Gravity Blade and Red Rock. Maybe it's a very strong event, and then you can play it off the Reiju, then it can easily break the deck because now the deck has really a lot of access to very consistent package. I also saw he got some random support from OP15 thanks to the new. Okay, I'm gonna fix this slightly.
OP15 is a spiritual set.
Yeah, I cannot say it anymore. No, but yeah, he's gonna get the new Sanji, the one that is gonna give unblockable that you can play off the stealth black. So I think also it's gonna solve some of the issues of the deck. So I hope that in the future we're gonna get a lot of support for the deck. I think it's still right now very generic. So if you wanna play it right now, I don't think this knowledge is gonna be lost because I'm pretty sure that the deck can come back later on into the future, as long as they will print either straw art cards that are either blue or purple, or some Sanjis that are 6k or less, or some generic events that are 7 cost or less. So I think the deck has a room for a lot of support. It can be either for other decks, and then he can steal it from other decks, and he can come back as a tier 1. But right now, I think the deck is a tier 1.
I'd like to also do a slightly change to the format of this interview. I want you to build your personal tier list for Sanji's matchup. So let's rank each matchup from 1 to 5, where 1 is the deck you absolutely want to avoid when playing Sanji, and 5 is the deck that you can almost lean back on your chair knowing you're basically already won. Let's start with Boa, a very strong deck that recently gained Nami as additional support. So, do you prefer going first, second, How do you evaluate the matchup, and where would you place in the tier list from 1 to 5?
I think Boa is like widely known by a lot of people as like a very difficult matchup. To be honest, I don't think the deck is too complex to predict on what they're gonna do, but it's very complex to know how to play against it. So normally, if you look at the statistics, a lot of people will think it's a very bad matchup. I think it's well fought. It's quite even. So against Boa, normally you want to go second because so first of all, Sanji is a deck that has like a preferred curve. It wants to go first most of the times, but it's not an hard curve where you say, okay, I want to go first, otherwise I lose. Differently from other decks, usually you pick the curve that your opponent wants to pick. So especially against Boa that wants to go second, I think you want to go second to break their curve, because usually they would just want to play the 4-cost Boa into Kuma, into then for 8 they have a lot of cards they can play. But in general, you want to make sure that you have enough resources to also survive against them. When you go second, for example, you can develop the 4-cost Reiju on curve, and that card can help you a lot against yellow decks, because you can block a lot of swings for free. So you can stay healthy against them and have enough time to then control the board. I think the key to the matchup is Gravity Blade. That is one of the best cards against decks like Boa or ST29, yellow decks in general. And then you have to play towards that. So usually you want to swing when you know that you can control the board. In terms of how much I want to face this deck, I would say it's kind of even. In my opinion, it's fine to face it. It's not a deck that I hate taking. I would say maybe in the middle, so 3. If I face it or not, I'm going to be fine. It's not a simple matchup, but it's not a hard matchup. So in the sense that, like, if you know how to play the matchup, it's going to be fine, but it's not easy to make decisions. So every game will be different, and your skill to evaluate how much you can be aggressive, or like how you can build the board control, it's very important. So it's not. I think it's a matchup that you need to practice a lot in order to master. But then once you master it, you can say it's kind of even from both sides. So it's well thought.
Okay, now staying similar in colors, let's talk about blue yellow Nami. Besides the new Nami, this deck also gained Nico Robin as support. So as well as the first question, do you prefer going first, second? How do you feel about the matchup and your rank in the tier list?
So against Nami in general, the approach is it's quite similar to Boa in some ways, but I think Nami triggers much less. So, for example, against Boa, you sometimes don't want to swing because you don't want to give them enough pieces on the board to pressure you. But against Nami, if you played Nami in the past, like, the deck doesn't trigger as much. So honestly, you can swing at them, and you need to pressure them a little bit in the early game, because otherwise you won't make it in time and you will give them too much time. In this matchup, you want to go first because Nami prefers to go first most of the times. I think also the 5-cost Nami on curve is a big problem. The 7-cost Robin, as you mentioned, there is a new addition, is one of the biggest problems. So in general, in this matchup, I think it's nice to pressure them a lot more, and especially developing Sanji on curve at 3 down already is pretty good, because then you can at least put that pressure as early as possible, and then don't give them enough time in the late game to develop a big board. So usually in this matchup, you want to control the board early with either the Gravity Blade, you can Red Rock, especially when they play the Robin, you can Red Rock. If they play the Thriller Bark version, you can Red Rock the Mori as well. If they play more Thriller Bark pieces, you can just Gravity Blade those. You have several ways, but the Nami, differently from the Boa, doesn't really build a big board. So it's going to be much easier for you to just control it with your events. But yeah, in general, I think this matchup is much better than the Boa, just for the fact that you can freely swing, and they don't have access to a lot of triggers that can enter. I think in the Thriller Bark version, they have a little bit more, but then in the normal version, they have only Kikunojo. Most of the times, you can also remove the Kikunojo if you play the Culverin, or if you just Gravity Blade, you can just Buff Burst and bounce it back to the hand. You have several ways to deal with it, so it's not a big problem. and also the nami doesn't have access to any unblockable event. So you can sometimes drop to 0 and then just play double blocker, or like just protect yourself with giants. You have several ways that you can just survive against the nami. In the scale, I will put nami as a easy matchup. I would say, I wouldn't say super easy. So I would say quite easy, but not too much. So I will put nami as a 4 out of 5. I think 5 is very few matchups, but because with Sanji the real difficulty is playing your own deck than playing based on your opponent, because you always need to adapt to your opponent. So it's very difficult to play every game because you need to know very well your deck and your opponent's deck. So the complexity is always very high. But I would say in the scale it's 4 for sure.
And now, completely changing colors, let's move on to mihawk, who, not being a heroine, didn't receive any support from EB03.
Yeah.
So, as well as in the first two questions.
So, against mihawk, of course, you want to go first. Why? Because mihawk wants to go first very badly. I think it's nice for you because normally you want to go first, and you also steal the curve from mihawk. In general, the best way to navigate this matchup is to just make sure that you have a red rock ready for when they start playing the big guys. So when they hit the Shanks, the mihawk, the low and Beppo, and so on, so on, you have the red rock ready either in your hand or in your trash to play off the Raiju. One of the best things you can do against mihawk is to just pressure them as much as possible as from the early game. So if you develop an early bird with the Sanjis, they will struggle trading them, and they suffer a lot of 6k swings. So especially in the early game, if you develop a Sanji on 3 down, then you can start going 666 out of 6s. And then if you pressure them enough in the late game, you can start just playing Raijus, Red Rock, the big guy, and then keep swinging with what you have on board. If you manage to develop a double Sanji in the early game, then the game is going to be quite easy. And you always want a 6 because they don't play so many 2Ks. They almost never add them with the searchers. So you're going to punish them because they play a lot of plus 3Ks. So at least with a 6K swing, you can force them to use the events. And if you swing only 5, they will just use a 1K because they do play a lot of 1Ks. mihawk suffers a lot of aggro. So if you play very aggressive, you will win. But in general, even if you don't win the die roll and you go second, you have a big chances of winning. The only card they can play on curve that can be a little bit annoying is the 5-cost Shigi. But also here, if they don't play the Tashigi, you will have access to Gravity Blade, especially if they play at least with the laws, the 6-cost lock. You have several ways to deal with the board. You have also the Divine Departure. If you play it, you have the Brochette Blow that you can use to trade the Tashigi. So you have several ways to deal with the board anyways if you don't have a way to deal with it with a removal. But this is also a matchup where like Raiju can be your win condition. Sometimes, if you miss the Raiju, you have to pivot into full aggro mode. So like overdeveloping the board to then go just face a lot before the low and Beppo, it's quite important. But then if you can control with the Red Dogs, usually it's I wouldn't say it's a walk in the park, but like it's normally not that complex as a matchup. Also because mihawk is quite predictable as a deck. So you can prepare in advance your turns to then control the board. In the scale, I will put mihawk as I would say between 4 and 5. It's very tough for me to say 5. Maybe I have some matchups with 5, but I would still keep mihawk as a 4 because if you don't see the red rock in time, you might struggle a little bit. But still, I treat it as a good matchup for us. So I wouldn't say it's so complex. Honestly, it's also very predictable. So you can plan in advance as from the early game.
So better than Boa.
Yeah, it's less high roll because the mihawk cannot really high roll. It's quite straight as a deck, but Boa can really like sometimes trigger something that is annoying, or like he can steal the games with like events or like some other things.
Going back to OP13, let's talk about Emu. We don't even know if it's Emu, it's a male or female, but definitely not a heroine. So no supports here either.
So the Emu matchup, of course, you want to go second because Emu wants to go second all the time. I consider this as probably the worst matchup for the deck. The biggest problem is that you don't really have, at least in my current list, you don't really have access to any unblockable events or like unblockable cards. There is a card that you can play that is Terracotta. It's a 2K from EB04, I think. They can make the Sanji unblockable, but I think this card is basically useless against everything else, and you don't really have a reliable way to search it. So I'm not really convinced this card is good enough to justify its presence in the deck list. The best approach against Emo is to be as aggressive as possible. I tend to do a lot of swings. I tend to develop a lot of Sanjis in the early game. Sometimes if you can develop double Sanji early on, so especially if you go seconds, sometimes it's nice to just go, for example, I don't know, Sanji, and then you can develop like double Sanji with Stealth Black. You have several ways to do it, but you will need to cycle a lot in the early game to find the Sanjis. I think the biggest issue of this matchup is that you don't always find several Sanjis in the early game, so you're not guaranteed to have an aggro early game. While in the other matchups, you will have more time to find the Sanjis because you don't really need to aggro them as much as you need to aggro the Emu, because in the late game they will scale so much better than the other decks. But in general, I think the approach needs to be super aggressive. So you just develop early on, you just ignore the board. I think the only piece you can trade is the Najuro, but other than that, I would always go face. I tend to swing a lot with 6k swings. If they don't have dons open, I go 7s. I go with a lot of 5s. Usually 5, 6, 7 is one of the best swings. Rarely you will have the chance to go 9 in the early game because you want to develop as much as possible. But sometimes you can make use of the Stealth Black to develop several pieces in one turn. And then once you're going to be close to 10 down, you need to accelerate. And then if you drop 10 to 0 life, you will be in a good spot. If they develop the first 10 cost with 0 life or 1 life, then if you can put them at 0, then you will have good chances. And then you can go for lethal if you start having Sanjis that are like 8 or 9Ks. If you have Usoachi that I'm playing as well. If you have Pudding as well. I think the Pudding is good early on because in the late game they will always have very few cards. So it's going to be tough for them to have a lot of cards if they block the early damage. But other than that, I would just say go face. Face is the place, is the best strategy. And yeah, if you go first, it's going to be very tough. You can still high roll, because if you go first, at least you can play Sanji on 3 and double Sanji on 5. But it's still going to be tough. You're going to have more swings, but they will reach 10 on earlier, so you're going to have one less turn of aggro, basically. But if you really think that you're going to face a lot of Emus, I would consider Terragot as an option. Or increase the Usoachis. In the scale, I will put Emo as 1, for sure. He's the worst matchup. But also Emu doesn't do well a lot in this meta because she has a lot of counters. So I also consider the fact that in this meta you have to pick your poison. Every deck has like that one impossible matchup. So I think I consider that in my pick as well.
And closing out the OP13 meta, what do you think about Ace as a matchup?
So Ace is quite the opposite as Emu. I think this matchup is a walk in the park. It's like the easiest matchup the deck has. That's really good because Ace places himself very well in this meta. Also in this matchup, you want to go seconds, of course, to break their curve. The only thing you care about in this matchup is to find the red rock. If you find the red rock and the red juice, is going to be very easy. The early game doesn't really matter because even if they develop something, you can always trade it with the Brochet Blow, you can trade it with your Sanjis, you can bounce it back with Buff Burst, Cold Brain. You have several ways to deal with the board. If they develop, like for example, for 4 Cavendish or Marker, you can just bounce it back. If you just ignore it and they play a Josu, for example, you can just Gravity Blade. You have several ways to deal with the board early on, so I wouldn't bother so much. But you need to make sure that in the late game, then you have the red rock ready, because once they eat with the first 10 costs, you want a red rock as soon as possible. It's very important to develop the Sanjis early on, because at least you can train their hand very fast. But it's not mandatory. You don't need several Sanjis. I think one is good enough in the early game, and then you can find the time in the mid game to develop a second one, especially with Stealth Black. But then once you reach the late game and your Sanjis are going to be 8,000, they're just going to lose. There is no way they can win. They're not going to have that much pressure. You can make use of Giant as well to protect yourself. You can just develop a Chump Blocker with the Stealth Black, or you can play the Rageus. You have several ways to protect yourself. So I don't think this is a a very difficult matchup. You just need to make sure you dig enough to find the red rocks for the turn that you actually need them, and then enough Regius to keep going with whenever they play a 10 cost, you want to answer with a removal most of the times. And then once you reach the late game, it's gonna be a smooth transition because your Sanjis are gonna get bigger and bigger, and then you won't even need to invest dons. You can just swing 8s or 9s or 10s, and then they will just lose. In the scale, I will put this matchup as 5. I think it's a very easy. The only way they have to win is if they play the Vista, 6 cost Vista. But I tested also against lists with 6 cost Vista, and yeah, it was very easy to win anyways because I would just chump block the Vista and win like that.
And finally, let's talk about the mirror. I will of course exclude this from the official tier list, unless you think it's heavily dice dependent. In that case, we could maybe define the best and worst scenario depending on who starts first. What do you think about the mirror overall?
I don't think that the die roll is so relevant because the game will be decided in the late game anyways. Going first or second doesn't really change your early game as a Sanji mirror match. If I can decide, I go first most of the times, just because I can develop my Sanji on 3 and maybe have an extra swing. I think that's the only reason why you want to go first. But this is a matchup where if you lose the die roll, you will be like, you don't care. I think it's a very tough matchup because it's very difficult in this mirror match to understand where's the edge. Because if you usually want to play for board control, but you also need to understand that you cannot take too much damage early on. Because with the new support, it's very easy to rebuild the board. So even if they fully trade your board, then you can just do a turn where you do like Sanji and then stealth black and bring back another Sanji. Most of the times you will both play with 2 Sanjis on board. So you need to understand when you can afford to swing, when you will be under Brochette Blow, under Divine Departure, and so on, so on. So you need to be careful on like how you respect all these cards, but also you need to keep up with the pressure because if they aggro you too much, you won't wanna hide yourself into defense mode, and then it's gonna be tough to come back. Giant is very strong. I think most of the times you want to stay at 2 life. You can drop to 1 life if they don't have a lot of pressure, or if you are aggroing them as much. Normally you want to play for board control, but you have to keep in mind that you won't have a way to deal with the board. Keep in mind that if they develop double piece, you can Gravity Blade, but you cannot deal with the Sanjis unless you swing or you play Brochette Blow or Divine Departure. So those you can only trade with swings. As Sanji players, we know that we struggle with a lot of small swings. So take that into account when you have some turns of pressure. When you have like 3 or 4 swings, you can go maybe 5, 6, 6. Like normally I would go like with a lot of 5s because we don't really pay a lot of 1Ks. I would avoid the 6s. I would either go 5 or 7. And then you need to be careful to not lose too many dons, but also need to be careful that if your opponent is behind with dons, you might not use leader effect to get back 1 don. So that's also important, especially when you enter the stage when they have giant and you have giant. So that's quite important. In general, I would say the big shift comes when you transition from board control to aggro. And when you start seeing a window to aggro them, you need to take it. But also you need to keep in mind that they can just develop double blocker in 1 turn. Of course, if they develop double Sanji, you always have the option to just Regio and Gravity Blade. So always take it into account as well, also when protecting yourself. But just in general, Giant, I think, is one of the strongest cards in the late game. Cards like Brochette and Divine Departure are also very strong. And differently from probably most matchups, the 5-cost Regio is not as good, but you can always use it to just draw cards, or like to get back a Sanji, for example. You have several things you can do with Regio. Of course, it's a even matchup, so we will put it on 3, I guess. I think it's complex to play because it's very hard to see where the advantage lies. So it's very important to understand when you need to swing face and when you need to go for board. And then when you need to dig, like what to dig, what to take, like what to add, like you have several options during the game. So it will be very tough to finish a game and say I played perfect. I think it's almost impossible to say that with this deck. But yeah, in general, I would say you need to think about how much time is left, board versus face, how much time you have left, how much defense they can build and you can build, if they can get back board. So these are usually the most important things.
Let's end today's interview by talking about a deck that recently received support in EB03 like SANJI and will potentially bring some result, Rosinante. What do you think about the deck and the matchup overall?
I think Rosinante is one of the surprises that we got recently. I think it was a deck that we didn't consider so much, but then thanks to the support from EB03 and 04, it got... I think I consider it a tier 1 deck. It's very strong. Fortunately for us, it's a good matchup for the sole reason that we have Gravity Blade access. In general, I think the matchup is quite easy to navigate. You want to go first because Rosinante really wants to go first. But even if you lose the die roll, it's going to be fine. The way that Rosinante plays forces them to be behind, under Gravity Blade range, because they usually want to play a 4-drop into a 6-drop. So generally speaking, it's quite easy for you to just achieve a good Gravity Blade. The gameplay in general is quite easy. You just want to control the board. But differently from other matchups, you cannot really trade the board with the swings. So you need to make sure that you have access to Gravity Blade and Red Rock. Most of the times, you want to just Gravity Blade the 4 cost and the 6 cost. And then you just want to Red Rock the 7 cost. So if you control the board as you go into the game, it will be very easy to navigate. If you skip some of the control of the board, you can always get it back with Gravity Blade, but you need to make sure that you don't get aggro too much. Don't fall for the trap of trying to aggro them, because they have a lot of resilience. Is very difficult to aggro them because they have access to I Love You. There is just a 2k that is like a better 1-cost event from Emu, like the I'm losing my edge, because then they can get back the law that can get back alive, and then brings a guy that boosts the whole board and the leader. Like, they have a lot of survivability. They play bullet string. They have several ways to survive. So I think the most important thing is to focus on the board control while you develop a board, and try to slowly trim their hands. But if you Gravity Blade early on, it will be very tough for them to redevelop board, because Rosie is also a deck that usually develops 1 guy per turn. So if you control the board early with Gravity Blade, then they will just play 1 guy per turn. And if they do play 2 guys, they will be behind Gravity Blade range again. So it's quite important to understand which threats do you have, and how much survivability do they have. It's not really a deck that can pressure you that much in the late game if you control the board as you go. But if you ignore the board, they will start to snowball quite a lot. So just make sure that you find Gravity Blade early on. Try to maximize your searchers to find it as soon as possible. And once you find one, then just recycle it with Rage. Red Rock is as important. Keep in mind that even if you miss a removal on a big guy, you can always just develop a chump block with a 6-cost Sanji and just block with that. Or a lot of times they have a lot of 8Ks, so they might just swing for 8. And then you can just Giant or Concassé. So you have several ways to deal with that. In general, they struggle removing the Sanjis. Some people explain the 5-cost Virgo. That helps them quite a lot. But I know that the 5-cost Virgo for them is a big tempo loss, because then they won't develop any laws on that turn. So make sure that if they develop the Virgo, you prepare a turn where you can actually remove it and then remove the rest of the board. I will put this matchup as a 4. It's not free, but it's very good for us thanks to Gravity Blade. Maybe if you don't see Gravity Blade, it's a 3. And if you don't see Gravity Blade and you lose the die roll and they see everything, maybe it's a 2. But to be honest, I think honestly, personally, I never struggled against it, so I think it's a good one.
Perfect. So this is the final tier list. We have Emu as 1, Nothing as 2, Boa and Mirror as a 3. Mirror is a 50-50, like you said. Mihawk, Nami, and Rosinante as a 4, and 5 we have Ace.
Yeah,
so
the only 5.
Huge thanks to Enrico for taking his time to join us and share his insight on Blue Purple Sanji. And as always, if you want a full breakdown, detailed explanation, and tech choices, check out the complete guide and use the code to support the channel. Bye, Enrico, and see you in the next one.
Thank you. Bye bye.